Hey guys, tonight we step back into the foggy, damp banks of the Seine, where Paris wasn't yet Paris, just a soggy island buzzing with insects and the low murmur of something ancient in the air. You're standing ankle-deep in mud, watching a small tribe of Celtic people, the Parisii, haul fishing nets and barter flint tools near wooden huts. There's smoke from open fires, laughter from children chasing chickens, and the ever-present smell of wet fur and damp reeds. You'll want to keep your cloak tight. This isn't exactly a vacation in Provence. And hey, just a heads up, you probably won't survive this. Whether it's a Roman legionnaire, a plague, or just slipping on sheep dung and breaking your neck on a rock, life here is short and unpredictable. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, post your location and what time it is where you're watching. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You cross a small wooden bridge onto Ile de la Cité, where the Parisii tribe has settled in this sweet spot between two slow-moving arms of the Seine. The year is, well, somewhere around 250 BCE. No one's invented calendars yet, but the tribe definitely knows this place matters. It's defendable, fertile, and surrounded by fish. What more could you want? The people here aren't nobodies. They've got trade networks that stretch into Germania and beyond, ferrying goods by canoe and foot, exchanging amber, tin, and salty gossip. The name Parisii might sound romantic today, but it could have just meant something as simple as the working ones or even boat people. Historians still argue whether they were a breakaway band of Celts or an offshoot of a bigger, more mysterious tribe from the north. By now, you're watching a shaman perform a ritual by the river, tossing a copper bracelet into the water, an offering to some river deity that may or may not appreciate the gesture. It's a delicate dance of survival. The city is a swamp in places, infested with wild boar, lurking wolves, and in summer mosquitoes the size of thumbs. At night, the darkness is total. No lanterns, no glow, just firelight and starlight. You huddle near a smoky hearth with some hunters, gnawing on spit-roasted trout and fermented berries, trying not to think about the rustle in the grass behind you. Even in prehistoric Paris, you're never alone. The Romans? Oh, they haven't arrived yet, but they're coming. For now, the Parisii don't know that their little riverside village is about to be swept into one of history's largest empires. For them, the world is tribal, spiritual, and occasionally terrifying. They wear animal pelts, iron torques, and paint themselves with plant dyes during festivals. You squint through the smoke and catch a glimpse of something unsettling: two men fighting over a spilled drink. Even without nations or politics, humanity always finds a reason to bicker. And then there's the climate. Don't let modern postcards fool you. Ancient Paris wasn't romantic. It was wet. Constant rain, thick mists, and every now and then the Seine would flood like it had a personal vendetta. People would drag their huts to higher ground, or else lose everything. But still, they stayed. Why? Because this spot was a crossroads. Even back then it felt important. By about 52 BCE, the scene begins to shift. Rome has its eye on Gaul, and Julius Caesar is not someone who tolerates independence. In his famous war reports, which, let's be honest, were just self-promo, he calls the Parisii brave, but makes no promise not to stomp them into the mud. You watch as Roman scouts sneak across the riverbanks, measuring the terrain, probably deciding where to put their first outpost. The Parisii are no pushovers, though. They torch their bridges and burn their own city rather than hand it to the Romans. It's a classic, if I can't have it, nobody can move. Still, it doesn't work. The Romans rebuild, rename the settlement Lutetia, yes, like a shampoo brand, and lay down the cold stone grid that will someday become the skeleton of Paris. You wander through what remains of a Parisii ritual site, a circle of stones, now crumbling under your feet. No plaques, no preservation, just rain and wind, and the quiet ghosts of people who never knew they were the beginning of something huge. Something that would someday sparkle with lights, perfumes, revolutions, and runways. The strangest thing? The Parisii disappear. Poof! Historians still argue whether they were absorbed into Roman society, slaughtered, or just slowly moved on. Their language vanishes. Their gods fade, and all that's left are burial mounds and the occasional decorative brooch found by a lucky archaeologist with a toothbrush and too much patience. But their name? That sticks. As you lie there, imagining the wet reed roofs, the howling wind, the low drumbeat of early civilization, you realize you're not just walking through mud, you're walking on the very first pages of one of the world's most beautiful messes. You don't get much rest before things start changing, fast. One morning you wake up to find the fish-drying racks replaced by scaffolding, and half the forest around the Seine chopped down for something the new invaders call infrastructure. The Romans have arrived, and they've brought with them an unshakable sense of superiority, stone blocks the size of donkeys, and bathhouses you're pretty sure aren't optional. Welcome to Lutetia, the Roman version of Paris. Don't let the name fool you. It's the same island, the same river, but now lined with colonnades, paved roads, and a strict, you can't just poop in the river anymore policy. The transformation is dazzling and a little jarring. One day you're foraging with a basket on your hip, and the next you're watching toga-clad engineers argue over aqueduct angles. A main road called the Cardo Maximus is carved straight through the settlement, connecting everything like a Roman Pinterest board. Right angles are suddenly in fashion. You'd better get used to it. They build arenas for plays, forums for debating, and temples where the gods have new names. Mercury instead of some old Celtic wind spirit. Jupiter instead of thunder bears or whatever the Parisii used to mutter about. Historians still argue whether this cultural swap was peaceful assimilation or a deeply strategic erasure. Maybe both. Depends on whom you ask, and whether you're asking them before or after a glass of imported Italian wine. The Romans even design a hypocaust system. Basically, underfloor heating. You wiggle your toes inside a villa and marvel at the warm tiles. It's the closest thing to luxury you've felt since not being chased by wolves. Baths become the social centers, where business deals are whispered through steam and gossip clings to the marble like condensation. You learn quickly that skipping bath day is the Roman version of social suicide. But let's not get carried away. This isn't all elegance and empire. For every tiled bath, there's still a tenement stacked 5 stories high, creaking under the weight of overcrowded families, goats, and questionable plumbing. Sure, the city has amphitheaters and a working sewer system, but disease and class divide still run rampant. And yes, chamber pots are still emptied out the window more often than you'd like. You step into the Arène de Lutetia, a semicircular amphitheater where Parisians cheer for mock battles, poetry contests, and sometimes, sadly, executions. You find a seat carved into the stone and notice it's smoother than the others. Generations of butts, all leaving a little mark of history. Who said the Romans weren't sentimental? The Romans build bridges, including a few stout stone crossings that will, shockingly, survive the next 1,000 years. You cross one at dawn and watch traders pushing carts of olives and amphorae while a Roman general huffs past you, too important to make eye contact. Some things never change. Commerce flourishes, and the Seine becomes a liquid highway. Boats full of goods arrive from every edge of the empire, Spain, Egypt, Gaul, and with the goods come stories, dialects, and cultural friction. You overhear a heated conversation between a Roman merchant and a local Gaulish potter over clay quality. It's more dramatic than a soap opera. In the quieter corners of town, cults and mystery religions bloom. One shady group worships Mithras in underground chambers lit only by oil lamps. Another, more radical fringe starts whispering about a crucified savior from Judea. You hear rumors of secret gatherings in catacombs and coded messages etched into stone. No one knows yet, but Christianity is about to crash the Roman party. By the 3rd century CE, cracks appear, not just in the roads but in the empire itself. Rebellions flare in the provinces. Funding dries up. The baths are less steamy. Statues begin to crumble. You can feel it in the air, that eerie stillness before the fall. Then comes a name: Julian. A Roman emperor with a philosophical streak and a fondness for Paris. Yes, Lutetia briefly becomes the capital of the entire Western Empire during his reign in the 360s CE. Imagine, Paris the center of the world. Kind of. He winters here, writes essays on Neoplatonism, and, fun fact, lives in a wooden palace that would have been one earthquake away from disaster. But glory is fleeting. Not long after Julian, the Roman grip loosens, and barbarian tribes press in from every side. The Visigoths, the Franks, and other excellent Scrabble words sense opportunity. By the late 4th century, you see more helmets than togas on the streets. Latin starts to blend with the local tongue. Tax records vanish. The elite pack up their statues and peace out. And one frosty morning, you hear the last Roman soldier march out of Lutetia. No parade, no farewell. Just the slow retreat of empire, like a tide pulling back and leaving behind broken columns and unanswered prayers. You wander the half-deserted forum, now littered with goats and wind-blown leaves. What was once Rome's shining outpost has become, what exactly? A husk? A memory? Or the fertile ruins for something else to rise? That's the strange beauty of Paris. It never disappears. It just reinvents itself. As the last Roman villa cracks under the weight of neglect and ivy reclaims the stones, you lie back in the rubble and stare at the sky. The empire has fallen, yes. But the city, your city, is only just beginning. Your dreams are filled with marble ruins, but when you wake, the air smells like wood smoke and fear. It's the early 800s now, and things have gone rustic. Gone are the crisp roads and bathhouse banter. Instead, Paris has slipped into something darker, rougher, and frankly, louder. You rub your eyes and see timber fortifications lining the Seine, a desperate necklace of palisades meant to keep invaders at bay. The Romans are long gone, and their precious Lutetia has morphed into a medieval outpost of survival. It's still Paris, technically, but now the main civic project is not building aqueducts. It's not getting killed. The threat? Vikings. Those not-so-jolly Norsemen in longboats, gliding silently up the river like they own the place. And you know what? Sometimes they sort of do. It starts small. Just a few raids here and there, a monastery plundered, a trader's wagon overturned. But by 845 CE, Paris gets the full Viking treatment. You're standing on the muddy banks as dozens of ships appear on the horizon, sails fat with wind and intentions. The leader? A man named Ragnar. Yes, that Ragnar, who shows up with a fleet and a massive appetite for silver and drama. The Franks, who technically run the area, are caught with their trousers down. Charles the Bald, his real name, unfortunately, decides that instead of fighting, it's better to pay Ragnar off. So he hands over 7,000 livres of silver and watches the raiders sail off, rich and smug. You, on the other hand, are left ankle-deep in ash and very much not reimbursed for the trauma. But the Vikings don't stop. Over the next century, they keep coming back like aggressive door-to-door salesmen who won't take no for an answer. Each time, the city adapts. The walls go higher, the watchtowers sharper. By the 880s, Paris has had enough. This is where things get spicy. The city, led by a count named Odo, actually resists. Imagine it. Wooden barricades on the bridges, archers lining the parapets, boiling oil bubbling in cauldrons. When the next Viking horde arrives, they expect a quick smash and grab. Instead, they get a year-long siege and a city that refuses to die. You're up on the battlements now, soaked from rain and exhaustion. Every few hours, someone yells, "Incoming!" and everyone ducks. It's muddy, it's brutal, and it smells like despair and wet leather. But there's something noble about it, too. Paris is learning to fight for itself, and the people are finally saying, "No more." Historians still argue whether this siege was the true turning point for the city's identity. But as you watch a band of locals rally around Count Odo and push the Vikings back into their boats, it sure feels like one. It's the first time Paris really defines itself as more than just a place. It becomes a symbol. Once the Vikings retreat, licking their wounds and plotting their next raid somewhere else, Paris starts to catch its breath. It's still a mess. Disease, hunger, and political instability are basically your neighbors now, but something is shifting. Enter the Carolingians. You remember Charles the Bald? Well, his family tries to restore some imperial dignity to the region, but honestly, it's like trying to repaint a house during a flood. Everything's splintered, and local lords are starting to act like kings of their own backyard. But one family takes advantage of the chaos: the Robertians. Sound familiar? They're the ancestors of the Capetians, the future kings of France. And Paris? It becomes their power base, their launch pad. By the late 900s, the city's not just a battered fortress, it's a political prize. Hugh Capet, Count of Paris, gets crowned king in 987 CE. You're in the crowd, trying to peek over heads as he places the crown on his own head because, surprise, there's no Vatican involvement yet. It's low budget, but historic. And now Paris is the capital of something again. But don't expect a royal makeover just yet. The streets are narrow, twisted, and mostly unpaved. You walk past pigsties right next to merchant stalls. People dump slop out windows with zero warning. The Seine's still a highway, but it's also the sewer, the fish market, and sometimes the morgue. Yet you notice something. People are staying. Despite the mess, the danger, and the Viking PTSD, the population is growing. There's trade, laughter, and even the occasional traveling juggler performing on a barrel top for coins. Somehow, in all this medieval chaos, Paris is becoming a city again. You pass by monks copying texts by candlelight, their fingers ink-stained and blistered. One pauses to stretch and complains about back pain and the lack of decent mead. In the abbeys and churches, bells toll endlessly. It's like the city's heartbeat now. It's loud, chaotic, imperfect, and alive. And the Vikings? Oh, they're not gone. They eventually settle in Normandy, just up the road. Some of them even become French. They marry locals, start paying taxes, and somehow forget they were once the scourge of Paris. You might even spot one in a tavern, sipping wine and grumbling about city taxes. The irony is thick. The city is still small by modern standards, only a few thousand people at most, but its pulse is stronger than ever. You trudge through a muddy market square, dodging a chicken and a drunken poet, and realize that despite all the fires, floods, and Viking drama, Paris refuses to quit. It's not the city of light yet. Heck, it's barely the city of soap. But it's here, breathing, evolving. And it's not done with you. You barely have time to shake the Viking dust off your cloak before the smell of fresh mortar and incense hits your nose. Paris is changing again, this time upward. The year is somewhere around 1100, and the city is stretching, stacking, and striving for heaven. The air carries the constant hammering of stonecutters and cranes, giant wooden wheels powered by dudes literally walking inside them like hamsters, loom over church foundations. Your boots squish into the muddy streets of the Ile de la Cité, but your eyes are pulled upward toward something incredible, rising slowly out of the chaos. Notre Dame. Yes, that Notre Dame. You're watching it grow from dust and ambition. It starts with a crypt, then pillars as wide as oak trees, and soon ribbed vaults that make you dizzy just looking up. Bishop Maurice de Sully wants a cathedral that screams both glory to God and check out what Paris can do. And honestly, it works. You stand beneath scaffolding, listening to builders shout in Old French, Latin, and a few creative curse words as they hoist up pieces of flying buttresses. You don't know it yet, but this building will survive plagues, revolutions, and tourists with selfie sticks. Right now, though, it's just holy geometry and a ton of bird droppings. Outside the cathedral zone, Paris is booming. You step into a neighborhood near the right bank and realize something odd. It smells like books, and not the rotting kind. The University of Paris has arrived. It's not official yet, but groups of students and scholars have started clustering around monasteries, debating Aristotle and theology so hard they forget to bathe. Welcome to the birth of the Latin Quarter. It's a strange little world. Students roam the streets in robes, arguing about logic while vendors sell eel pies nearby. Professors teach in rented rooms and are paid in beer and bread. Historians still argue whether this was the first modern university or just a glorified book club with Latin flair. Either way, you're witnessing something big. Paris is becoming an intellectual magnet. People from England, Italy, and the Holy Roman Empire come here to study and bicker. Theology dominates, but other subjects, medicine, law, even astronomy, sneak into the curriculum. You see a star map etched into a ceiling and a friar excitedly explaining planetary orbits like it's the latest gossip. And the city's not just building minds, it's building bodies. Over on the left bank, markets are exploding with goods. You pass stalls stacked with spices from the Levant, wool from Flanders, and glassware that sparkles like something out of a dream. Craftsmen have guilds now, each one with strict rules, secret handshakes, and probably way too much fermented honey wine. The Seine has become a living artery, clogged with barges and gossip. You hop aboard a grain barge drifting under the Petit Pont and overhear a scandal involving a bishop, a baker, and some misplaced relics. Welcome to Parisian small talk. The population? Surging. By the late 1100s, you're rubbing shoulders with nearly 100,000 people. It's loud, cramped, and aggressively aromatic, but the energy is addictive. Paris is officially one of Europe's biggest cities now, and it's starting to act like it. You squeeze into a side street near Les Halles, the central market, and watch fishmongers haggle with butchers while a cat steals a sausage behind their backs. Overhead, laundry flaps like prayer flags. Somewhere, a rooster crows, like it's been personally wronged. It's messy, glorious urban theater. Yet beneath the surface, things aren't all cheerful. Power games are intensifying. The Capetian kings, especially Philip II, aka Philip Augustus, aren't content with symbolic rule. They want control, real control, and Paris becomes their pet project. Philip doesn't mess around. He paves roads, builds a wall around the city, constructs the Louvre, not as an art museum, mind you, but a fortress to keep out those pesky Normans and possibly rebellious nobles. You sneak inside during construction and find it cold, echoey, and clearly designed by someone who hates comfort but loves defense. The city's structure evolves. Bridges connect left and right banks like arteries feeding a growing beast. Streets are still a mess, muddy, narrow, and often used for both walking and urinating, but they're busier than ever. Night watchmen now roam with torches, calling out the hour and occasionally getting into brawls with drunk students. Some traditions never die. Back at Notre Dame, the facade finally starts to resemble a face. Gargoyles appear, jutting out like sarcastic little stone guardians. One looks suspiciously like your old landlord. Coincidence? Probably. You attend a service inside. The incense chokes your lungs, and the chanting echoes through the nave like a spell. Light spills through stained glass, painting the worshippers in blues and reds. Even if you're not religious, you feel it. That sense of awe that makes you whisper, even when no one's listening. Meanwhile, the university gets a boost from Pope Innocent III, who grants it official recognition. It's now the place for theological schooling in all of Christendom. You wander into a debate between two scholars about the soul's weight at death. One swears it's 7 grams. The other argues that's just the weight of regret. And somewhere between the scholarly arguments, cathedral building, and booming markets, a quieter innovation happens. Parisian identity. The people begin to think of themselves as more than just from the Ile de la Cité. There's a pride now. A pulse, a sense that this isn't just any city, it's Paris. You lean against a tavern wall one evening, listening to a street musician pluck a lute while kids chase chickens down the alley. In that moment, it hits you. The chaos, the stink, the chanting, the stone towers reaching for heaven. It all hums with a single message. Paris is becoming a masterpiece. And it's doing it brick by brick, sermon by sermon, and argument by argument. And you? You're lucky enough to be standing right in the middle of the blueprint. You wake to a strange new sound in Paris. Metal clinking against metal in perfect rhythm, like a heartbeat made of iron. It's the 1200s now, and the city is humming with confidence. The mud is still here. Don't worry, no one's invented city drainage yet. But Paris has swagger. It has a king who walks with a monk's humility and rules with a bureaucrat's obsession, Louis IX, or as history will remember him, St. Louis. You catch sight of him in the streets. Yes, the king actually walks among his people, barefoot sometimes. He's tall, pale, with a solemn face like he's always thinking about your sins. But he's not just posing. Louis builds hospitals, reforms laws, and makes judges swear they won't take bribes, even if offered a good roast goose. That's a real quote. He also bans things like dice and scandalous dances, which means you're stuck playing chess and behaving. Mostly. The Sainte-Chapelle rises under his orders, a royal chapel that looks like someone built a cathedral out of stained glass and prayers. You stand inside it one afternoon and feel like you're floating inside a jewel box. It's meant to house relics of Christ's Passion, which Louis paid an absolutely bonkers sum for, more than he paid to build the whole chapel. Was it worth it? Historians still argue whether the king was deeply pious or just deeply into prestige projects. Outside, the city is bursting its medieval seams. Philip Augustus's wall still stands, but Paris is already crowding against it like a teenager outgrowing their hoodie. The left bank becomes a scholar's playground, lecture halls, scriptoria, and the ever-expanding University of Paris. On the right bank? Business, banks, bakers. A street named for every guild you can imagine. Cutler's Street, Butcher's Row, even one for hat makers who specialize in pointy styles no one needs. You get swept into the crowd at Les Halles again, only this time it's not just fish and turnips. You spot saffron from the east, cotton from India, sugar that costs more than gold, and a child selling frogs for dinner. Parisian cuisine is adventurous. You pick one up and it blinks. You put it back. But something darker hums beneath all the color and commerce. You walk past the Jewish quarter, known as the Juiverie, and feel a cold wind despite the sun. Louis, for all his charity, enforces strict rules on the Jewish population, forcing them to wear identifying badges, banning them from certain trades. In 1242, under his reign, thousands of copies of the Talmud are publicly burned in the Place de Grève. The crowd watches silently. You do too. It's a moment that clings to your clothes like smoke. Still, Louis continues his mission to shape Paris into the holiest of cities. He sends money to the poor, hosts daily meals for beggars, and even builds the 15 Vangs hospital, designed to house exactly 300 blind men. The name means 1520s because Roman numerals and logic are currently in an on-again, off-again relationship. The Seine never rests. You watch barges loaded with limestone, wine, and firewood drift past under newly widened bridges. On a hot afternoon, you wander onto the Pont au Change and watch money changers at work, early bankers with strong opinions and louder voices. It's where the term bank rate gets its bite. You try to eavesdrop, but they're speaking a French so thick and fast it might as well be Latin with a hangover. The Cathedral of Notre Dame? It's finally mostly done. Its western facade now looms with that iconic rose window, 2 belfries, and about 50 statues glaring at you like disappointed teachers. Gargoyles leer from above, some cute, some horrifying. You swear one winks. The university flexes its muscles now, too. Students strike over tuition. Professors get exiled for calling bishops dim-witted beet farmers. The Latin Quarter is alive with arguments, poetry, and the occasional riot. You pass a group of scholars debating Aquinas in the street, one of them barefoot and furious, because that's just how Parisians learn things. And yet, for all this growth and sparkle, there are cracks forming. A whisper begins to echo in wine cellars and under bridge arches. War. Not just the Crusades, though Louis IX does lead 2 of them and dies during the second, in Tunisia, from dysentery or heatstroke or possibly bad shellfish. No, the real storm is closer to home. England. Because when the kings of France look west, they see something terrifying. English kings who hold more French land than the French crown does. It's like your annoying cousin owns most of your house and keeps reminding you how nice the furniture is. Something's going to snap. Meanwhile, plague hasn't hit yet, but the rats are rehearsing. Sanitation? Still a dream. You step into a narrow alley and nearly faint from the mix of urine, fish bones, and perfume. Everyone carries pomanders, little scented orbs of cloves and cinnamon, just to survive the walk to work. You consider inventing soap, but the guilds would riot. One bright note. Art. Tapestries bloom with color. Illuminated manuscripts glow like stained glass. Music, once strictly Gregorian and snoozy, begins to flutter into something more lyrical. You hear a jongleur on a street corner playing a vielle, basically a medieval violin, and singing about courtly love, which is code for I'm into you but you're married. And there's fashion. Oh, Paris loves fashion. Pointy shoes that curl like snail shells, hoods with tails long enough to trip you, sleeves so wide they could double as sails. You try on a tunic with buttons down to your knees and immediately regret it. It takes 10 minutes just to sit. Yet for all the frivolity, there's a quiet brilliance in the air. Paris isn't just expanding. It's thinking, praying, planning, inventing. The wheels are turning, and the city seems to know it's becoming something vast and permanent, even if no one can name it yet. One evening, you climb to the top of Montagne Sainte-Geneviève and look out. The city flickers with candlelight and ambition. Bell towers rise like forest trees. The Seine glows silver in the moonlight. Below you, the whole of medieval Paris breathes in unison. Students, bakers, monks, pickpockets, lovers, all part of something bigger. You take it in slowly, because you know storms are coming. But tonight, Paris shines. You wake to a church bell tolling slow and strange. It's deeper than usual, almost hesitant. Something feels off in the air. The smell of bread is still there, wafting from a bakery on Rue Saint-Honoré, but beneath it, smoke, sweat, and something metallic. It's the 1300s, and Paris is tilting. You step outside, and the sky feels lower than usual. Maybe it's the new taxes, or maybe it's just the collective mood of a city wobbling between glory and collapse. Things begin with a crunch, literally, as the Great Famine of 1315 hits. Crops fail across Europe. Rain won't stop. Grain turns to mush in the fields. And here in Paris, bread prices skyrocket. You see a baker chased down an alley by a starving crowd after someone starts a rumor he's hiding flour in his mattress. Food is scarce. People eat bark, some eat rats, well, let's say there are whispers about stews no one asks too many questions about. You eye your lunch skeptically and settle on roasted turnip. Chic. And just as things begin to recover, Paris gets sucker-punched again, this time by something far more devastating than rain. It's 1348, and you can feel it in your bones before you even hear the words, "The Black Death has arrived." The first signs are almost subtle. A merchant's child coughing at the port. A friar who suddenly stops ringing the chapel bell. Then it spreads like wildfire, felling peasants and nobles alike. You walk through Rue de la Ferronnerie and see doors marked with chalk, carts filled with bodies, and priests too scared to give last rites. Entire families disappear overnight. Paris loses nearly half its population. That's tens of thousands gone in less than a year. Historians still argue whether the city's density or the river's role in trade accelerated the spread. But honestly, the rats deserve a lot of the credit. You spot one dragging a chicken bone near Saint-Denis and make a mental note to burn your shoes. The university shuts down. So do markets. So do your pores from the cloying scent of herbs stuffed into beak-shaped plague masks. Even the Louvre fortress stands quiet, its walls dark with soot and fear. For once, nobody cares about theology, politics, or even fashion, only survival. And yet, through the ashes, Paris keeps breathing. Somehow. It's not just death in the air, it's rebellion. After the plague, something shifts. Labor is scarce, workers demand better pay, landowners resist, and by the 1350s, Paris becomes the epicenter of something new. Rage. You find yourself in the middle of Etienne Marcel's revolt. He's the provost of merchants, kind of a mix between mayor, union boss, and guy who really wants to be king adjacent. He demands reforms, and when King John II is captured by the English at the Battle of Poitiers, Marcel sees his chance. The streets of Paris turn tense. You spot armored guards wearing blue and red, Marcel's colors, patrolling near the Hôtel de Ville. At one point, Marcel and his men break into the royal palace and murder 2 royal councillors in front of the Dauphin. Blood soaks the carpet. The crown is shaken. You suddenly become very interested in walking the other way. But this isn't just political drama. It's class warfare. Peasants outside the city are rising too, in a rebellion called the Jacquerie. You hear rumors of pitchforks and fire in the countryside, and even within Paris, the poor are angrier, louder, harder to silence. And while this chaos brews at home, the 100 Years' War drags on like a nasty cold. England and France keep taking turns invading each other, and you lose track of how many times the English torch a French village or vice versa. Paris itself stays mostly safe, for now, but it becomes a logistical hub, a kind of nerve center for a country constantly at war with itself and its neighbors. Still, the intellectual gears never stop grinding. The University of Paris reopens with new debates. Now the scholars argue whether the plague was divine punishment or just bad air. Some suggest it's the planets aligning in unfortunate ways. One guy insists it's caused by sadness vapor. You nod like that makes sense and back away slowly. And then comes one of the most peculiar episodes in Paris's long, dramatic saga, the trial of the Knights Templar. Okay, technically it begins in 1307, but its echoes linger well into this century. You manage to sneak into the shadows of the Temple Fortress, watching as Templars, those elite Crusader knights, are arrested, tortured, and tried for heresy. King Philip IV wants their land and wealth, and the Pope isn't exactly protesting. The charges? Spitting on the cross, devil worship, kissing each other's backsides. Historians still argue whether the Templars were guilty, framed, or just too rich to survive in a world where kings needed cash. In any case, you witness Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, burned at the stake on an island in the Seine. Just before he dies, he curses the king and pope. And wouldn't you know it, both are dead within a year. Coincidence? Sleep with one eye open. And while Paris lurches between chaos and recovery, a slow cultural shift begins. Artists turn from strictly religious themes to something more human. You spot a mural with peasants laughing. A manuscript depicting daily life, not just saints. It's small, but it hints at a future where people might matter as much as gods. You end this chapter standing at the gates of the city, looking out. Paris is hurting, bruised, hollowed out in places. But it's also smarter, tougher, more layered. It has seen death and fire and bad governance and weird trials, and somehow it's still here, still baking bread, still debating metaphysics, still making fun of the English. You pull your cloak tight as dusk settles in, listening to the hum of a city that refuses to die. You don't remember falling asleep, but now you're jolted awake by thunder, not from the sky, but from hooves. Horses, hundreds of them, charging the muddy roads outside the walls of Paris. The year is 1420, and your city is about to fall into English hands. Yep. This is the part of the 100 Years' War that really gets personal. Paris has changed hands before, but this time it feels different. English banners flutter from rooftops. You walk past the Notre Dame and notice guards with unfamiliar accents barking orders. This isn't just occupation, it's humiliation. The Treaty of Troyes says Henry V of England will inherit the French crown after King Charles VI dies. And Charles, well, he's not exactly in fighting shape. He thinks he's made of glass, literally. Wears reinforced clothing so he doesn't shatter. You can't make this stuff up. Inside the city, Parisians adjust. Some collaborate with the English, others quietly resist. You pass a group of university students passing coded messages through bakery deliveries. Resistance, one baguette at a time. A few even say the Dauphin, Charles VII, the real French heir, is gathering support in the south. But in Paris, his name is barely whispered. Then comes the voice. A country girl, teenage, claims to hear saints. You almost laugh when you hear the first rumors. What can a peasant girl from Domremy do that professional armies haven't? But then Joan of Arc takes the stage. She cuts through the war's fog like a sword through butter. First Orleans, then victory after victory. She inspires soldiers, terrifies generals, and writes letters that start with, "Surrender to the King of Heaven." Not exactly subtle. You can't see her, not yet. But you feel her. Her victories shake Paris to its core, rattling English confidence. Charles VII gets crowned in Reims thanks to her. Suddenly that whisper in the city, maybe the English don't belong here, gets louder. But Paris is stubborn. It doesn't switch sides overnight. When Joan and Charles attempt to retake the city in 1429, Parisians hold fast. The attack fails. Joan is wounded. She's captured the next year and sold to the English, then burned at the stake in Rouen. You can smell the smoke from miles away. She dies at 19. You wonder how someone so alive could be extinguished so cruelly. Still, the tide has turned. By 1436, Paris kicks out the English and opens its gates to Charles VII, the Dauphin who was once ridiculed. You stand in the crowd as he enters, not triumphant, but relieved. The city is his again. People cheer, but you can sense the weariness beneath it. Too many years of war, too many lost. The city rebuilds slowly. The bridges, markets, and fortifications are restored. But something is different. Parisians are more suspicious now, more political, less likely to believe in kings and more interested in lawyers. The Parliament of Paris, that high court of nobles and scholars, grows more powerful, sometimes even ignoring the king's orders. You watch a scribe roll his eyes after copying a royal edict. The paper's still wet. Culturally, however, things begin to bloom again. The shadows of war give way to color. The court of Charles VII becomes a haven for painters, poets, and composers. Music brightens. Illuminated manuscripts now include little jokes in the margins, like a snail fighting a knight. You swear the snail wins. And fashion? Oh, it's back, baby. Men in houppelans with sleeves wide enough to store snacks. Women in hennons, those towering cone hats that look like traffic cones designed by angels. You try one on and knock over a candle. Two monks scowl. Meanwhile, the old Louvre is finally being used less like a fortress and more like a royal residence. You sneak a peek through a courtyard window and see courtiers dancing under a chandelier made of deer antlers. Classy. And yet poverty clings to Paris like smoke. Beggars still line the streets near Les Halles. Orphans sleep near the cathedral. Disease hasn't left. Small outbreaks of plague still ripple through the population. The city learns to grieve quickly and move on faster. Scholars return in droves. The University of Paris reasserts itself as Europe's intellectual furnace. You hear heated debates on everything from the morality of banking to whether demons can influence dreams. One professor claims sneezing expels the devil. You sneeze dramatically in his lecture and get kicked out. Printing hasn't arrived yet, but the appetite for books is growing. You spot scribes copying romances by hand, giggling over courtly love scenes where knights write poems for ladies who are so beautiful they make roses cry. You try writing one. It's okay, but it's not all poetry and pastries. Charles VII, like every monarch, has to deal with unrest. Armies that helped him reclaim France don't disband. They become roaming gangs of mercenaries. He creates a standing army to keep them in check. It's the beginning of a France ruled by professionals, not just noble families with big egos. And here's a moment for the nerds. In 1452, a new astronomical clock is installed at the Palais de la Cité. It doesn't just tell time, it tracks the sun, moon, and stars. You watch people line up just to see it tick. In a world where time once flowed with the church bells, this feels almost modern. Chillingly so. Paris ends the century with a deep inhale. It survived famine, plague, war, and foreign occupation. And in its bones, it knows more is coming. But for now, the city reclaims its rhythm. You sit by the Seine as twilight falls. The river glows like spilled ink. A barge passes, carrying barrels of wine to the south. A student recites poetry to his crush in broken Latin. Behind you, Notre Dame's bell tolls once more, this time with clarity. You close your eyes. The nightmare has lifted. You wake to the smell of hot wax, ink, and ambition. It's the early 1500s now, and Paris is stretching its limbs after a long, war-torn slumber. The Renaissance has arrived, and even though Italy gets all the credit, Paris is determined to catch up. And add a French flair, of course. You stroll down the Rue Saint-Jacques and notice something different. Books. So many books. Thanks to Gutenberg's clever invention, printing presses are spreading across Europe like gossip at a royal banquet. Paris embraces it with gusto. What used to take monks months to copy by hand can now be mass-produced in days. You watch as printers churn out Bibles, anatomy manuals, and scandalous love poetry with equal enthusiasm. The University of Paris, once shaken by plague and war, is buzzing again. Students argue loudly in Latin, while professors lecture on Aristotle, astronomy, and a dangerous new idea: humanism. The belief that people, not just God, deserve attention. You nod along, but also keep an eye out for anyone who might accuse you of heresy, just in case. And here's a quirky little twist. Parisians become obsessed with the body, not just in art, but in medicine. Dissections, once taboo, are now carried out at the Hôtel Dieu hospital. You sneak in to watch one, until you faint at the first snip. No judgment. Meanwhile, fashion gets flamboyant. Velvet, embroidery, and those square-toed shoes that look like someone's wearing pastry boxes on their feet. Men strut in puffed sleeves. Women wear bodices so tight you're not sure how they breathe. Probably don't. Over at the royal court, big changes are brewing. Charles VIII and Louis XII dabble in Italian wars, but it's Francis I who steals the spotlight. Crowned in 1515, he's young, cultured, and painfully handsome, according to his royal PR team. Think of him as the French Renaissance's hype man. Francis I loves art, and he loves Paris, but not enough to live there full-time. He prefers chateaux in the Loire Valley. Still, he invests in the capital. Under his rule, the Collège de France is founded, a place where scholars teach whatever they want, even if it doesn't please the church. Scandalous! You attend a lecture on Greek poetry and leave feeling smarter than you probably are. And speaking of scandal, religion. The Protestant Reformation is exploding across Europe. Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses in 1517, and suddenly half of Christendom is arguing. Paris, naturally, doubles down on Catholicism. This is the city of Notre Dame, after all. But not everyone agrees. A growing number of Parisians are drawn to Protestant ideas, especially the wealthier, literate classes. You overhear secret sermons in back rooms, where the wine is strong and the theology stronger. One woman offers you a homemade psalm booklet. You politely decline. Burning at the stake doesn't sound like your vibe. In 1534, tensions boil over with the affair of the placards. Protestants post anti-Catholic posters all over Paris, even one on the king's bedroom door. Bad move. Francis I feels personally attacked, and the backlash is swift. Executions, arrests, censorship. You watch pamphlets burned in public squares as priests chant over the flames. Yet amidst all this, Paris keeps building. The city expands eastward. Bridges are repaired. New neighborhoods spring up. And perhaps most famously, the old fortress of the Louvre begins its transformation into a royal palace. Francis starts the project, dreaming of a Renaissance court filled with sculpture and elegance. You sneak past the scaffolding and glimpse a courtyard lined with classical columns. One day, this will house more than just monarchs. But not all royal projects are so refined. Over at Les Halles, the city's central market, things get fragrant. Fish guts, pigs' heads, baskets of live chickens. It's a sensory buffet and a logistical nightmare. You hold your breath and push through the crowd, marveling at how Paris still functions while teetering on chaos. Meanwhile, under all the perfume and parchment, darker currents are swirling. The Catholic Church isn't just fighting Protestants, it's also pushing back against scientists, reformers, and anyone who thinks maybe the earth revolves around the sun. You attend a dinner where someone dares to mention Copernicus, and the room goes silent, except for the one guy choking on a grape. You hide in a bakery basement with a dozen others, hearts pounding. Upstairs, glass shatters, screams echo. At one point, you make eye contact through a crack in the floor with a blood-soaked soldier leaning on a poleaxe. You don't breathe for 20 minutes. When the violence ebbs days later, the city stinks of rot and regret. The Seine runs brown. The wedding party has turned into a funeral march. Henry of Navarre survives, barely, by converting to Catholicism on the spot. He later jokes that Paris is worth a mass. You're not laughing yet. After the massacre, Paris becomes a fortress of fear and fanaticism. Protestantism is all but extinguished within the city walls. The Catholic League rises, a militant organization of nobles and clergy who demand religious purity and the exclusion of heretics. You see their banners unfurling across the rooftops, crosses, swords, and ominous Latin. Meanwhile, King Henry III, the last of Catherine's sons, ascends to the throne. He's flamboyant, intelligent, and utterly out of place in this blood-soaked chessboard. He wears pearls, adores his male favorites, called the Mignon, and tries to steer France toward peace. You watch him deliver long speeches in the Louvre, wearing lace so delicate it could catch fire from a glance. But the League hates him. To them, he's soft, indecisive, and far too tolerant of Huguenots. The city begins to turn on him. Parisians rally under the Guise family, Catholic hardliners who start acting like they run the place. Then comes the day of the barricades, May 12th, 1588. It's exactly what it sounds like. You step outside and find Paris transformed. Cobblestone streets are blockaded with overturned carts, furniture, and literal garbage. Citizens swarm with pikes and muskets. Henry III flees the city in disguise. You watch him vanish into the mist, clutching his dog and dignity. He never regains control. A year later, in a monastery outside Paris, he orders the assassination of the Duke of Guise. A week after that, he's stabbed to death by a fanatical monk. In a morbid twist, he names Henry of Navarre, yes, the Protestant, as his successor. Cue the chaos. Paris refuses to accept a Protestant king. The League digs in. The city shuts its gates, stockpiles grain, and braces for a siege. You join thousands trapped inside as famine creeps in. People eat rats. Some whisper about cannibalism. You eat a questionable sausage and pretend not to ask questions. Henry of Navarre surrounds the city with troops, but instead of slaughtering his way in, he plays the long game. After 4 years of resistance, in 1593, he makes his famous conversion official. Paris is worth a mass, he declares, walking into Notre Dame not as a heretic, but as a Catholic king. The next year, 1594, he finally enters Paris. Not with vengeance, but with reconciliation. You're there in the crowd, watching a king shake hands instead of drawing swords. People weep. Bells ring again. Real joy this time. Henry IV, as he's now called, begins repairing the soul of the city. He launches public works, bridges, hospitals, fountains. He opens the Place Dauphine, renovates the Pont Neuf, and tries to reconnect a city broken by faith. You see a Protestant and a Catholic sharing bread in the market, and almost drop your own. One quirky moment. Henry IV walks the streets in disguise to hear people's complaints. Some say he carried a notebook, others say he disguised himself as a peddler. You pass a man selling onions with suspiciously regal posture. Maybe. By the end of the 16th century, Paris is stitched back together, but the seams still show. It has survived fanaticism, famine, and kings stabbed by monks. But it's learning to bend, not break. You sit by the Seine again. The waters move slower now. Church bells toll softly. Somewhere, a violin plays. You exhale, grateful the city exhaled with you. You blink into a new century, the 1600s, and Paris, ever theatrical, is dressing itself in stone and silk. The blood-soaked memories of religious war still cling to some corners, sure, but for now the mood shifts. Peace, it seems, has a scent. Warm bread, rose water, and freshly cut limestone. And then comes Louis XIV's final move. He abandons Paris for Versailles. He wants space. He wants order. He wants distance from the chaos of the Fronde and the murmuring city that dared defy him as a boy. So he expands a hunting lodge into a palace so massive it swallows time. Versailles becomes the sun, around which all nobles must orbit. You feel Paris shift. The court leaves. The city is no longer the heart of power. It's the brain, the mouth, the stomach, maybe even the spleen, but not the crown. Yet it adapts. Paris grows in intellect and ambition. It becomes a place of writers, thinkers, merchants. The age of Versailles brings with it irony. As the Sun King isolates himself in golden halls, the groundwork is being laid for the Enlightenment, a movement that will eventually challenge the very idea of divine kingship. As you sit in a left-bank cafe, well, a wooden bench near a bakery, someone hands you a pamphlet. It criticizes court excess. It questions tradition. It suggests change. You glance around nervously, then read on. Paris is getting restless again, but this time it's not about religion. It's about reason. You stretch your legs along the Seine as a pale sunrise brushes the rooftops, and you feel it, that tension in the air, like static before a storm. The year is 1700-something, and Paris is no longer just a city. It's an idea, an argument in stone, a ticking clock with powdered wigs and whispered heresies. Versailles may be where the king lives, but Paris is where the thinking happens. The salons are on fire, figuratively, thankfully, and suddenly everyone you meet seems to have a quill in their coat pocket and a revolutionary opinion they just have to share over tea. Welcome to the Enlightenment. You wander into a salon on the right bank. The chandelier flickers as Madame Geoffrin presides with perfect posture and a barely concealed smirk. Voltaire is holding court. Yes, that Voltaire, with eyebrows that wiggle every time he skewers the church or monarchy. You chuckle. Someone glares at you for interrupting his rant on organized religion. You whisper an apology and steal a biscuit. Philosophes like Rousseau, Diderot, Montesquieu, they're household names now, not because they own land, but because they own ideas. You get your hands on a copy of the Encyclopédie, a massive tome edited by Diderot that aims to document everything. Not just tools and plants, but politics, ethics, the very structure of society. It's like Wikipedia if it came in 35 volumes and could get you arrested. Outside the salons, Paris hums with printing presses and pamphlets. The censors are working overtime, but it's like trying to plug a sieve with your finger. Underground presses churn out anonymous manifestos. You find one tucked inside a loaf of bread. Its author suggests that kings are made, not born. Bold stuff for a croissant. And yet, Versailles grows ever more decadent. Louis XV takes the throne in 1715, a young boy under the guidance of Philippe II, Duke of Orléans. The regency is a bit of a party. Paris rejoices, nobles return, and for a brief moment, the city reclaims some glory. You sip wine under lanterns strung across Place Vendôme and try not to think about how unstable everything feels underneath the glitter. By the time Louis XV comes of age, the shine has dulled. He builds the École Militaire, improves infrastructure, and tries to be kingly. But his reign is increasingly marked by indifference and debt. His palace becomes a playground of mistresses, most famously Madame de Pompadour, who funds Enlightenment thinkers even as they critique the very system that funds her. You see her glide past in a gilded carriage, cool as ice and smarter than everyone in it. Meanwhile, poverty festers. Parisian slums grow. Bread prices spike. You overhear one desperate mother say she's feeding her children soup made of boiled straw. Historians still argue whether the crown understood how dire it was. But you live it. You see hungry eyes in every alley. You also see science blooming. The Paris Observatory maps the stars. The Jardin du Roi evolves into a center for botany and comparative anatomy. You watch a crowd gather to see a demonstration of the lightning rod. Someone mutters that it's witchcraft, while a young boy nearby dreams of electricity lighting the city. And then comes Louis XVI in 1774. He's well-meaning, awkward, and hopelessly out of depth. His queen, Marie Antoinette, is young, Austrian, and quickly becomes the lightning rod herself, gossiped about, ridiculed, and deeply misunderstood. You see her once at the Tuileries, her hair piled high with pearls and rumors. She smiles, but it doesn't reach her eyes. In the cafes and streets, the talk turns sharper. The American Revolution ignites French imaginations. If they can overthrow their king, maybe we can too, you hear someone whisper. You sip your coffee a bit more nervously. 1789 hits like a piano dropped from the sky. Also, in the cafes and streets, the talk turns sharper. The American Revolution ignites French imaginations. If they can overthrow their king, maybe we can too, you hear someone whisper. You sip your coffee a bit more nervously. 1789 hits like a piano dropped from the sky. The Estates General convenes. Commoners, the Third Estate, are tired of being taxed without voice. You attend the tennis court oath, where representatives swear not to disband until they've written a constitution. It smells like sweat and revolution. No one has a plan, but everyone feels the momentum. Then comes the storming of the Bastille on July 14th. You don't just hear about it, you're there. You push through the crowd, past makeshift barricades, smoke, shouting. The fortress prison, a symbol of royal tyranny, falls not just from cannon fire but from the weight of centuries of anger. Heads are paraded on pikes. You don't sleep that night. Paris descends into revolutionary fever. Lafayette leads the National Guard. The Declaration of the Rights of Man is proclaimed from balconies. People cheer. You cheer. Then pause, because with hope comes chaos. The king is brought back to Paris from Versailles like a prize cow. The royal family is installed in the Tuileries. You pass them sometimes through the palace gates. They look less like rulers and more like ghosts in waiting. Bread prices soar again. The Women's March on Versailles happens in October. You join the mass of furious Parisians, mostly women, stomping in mud, armed with pitchforks and rolling pins. You chant for bread. You chant for justice. You chant just to drown out the fear. In the midst of it all, clubs form. Jacobins, Cordeliers, Girondins, each with pamphlets, ideas, enemies, each louder than the last. You attend a Jacobin meeting and leave dazed from the fury in the room. Robespierre speaks softly, but carries the power of thunder. He believes virtue and terror are not opposites. You start sleeping with your shoes on. Church bells begin to ring for executions. By 1791, the king tries to flee. You're on the street when the rumor spreads. "The king has run!" people shout. But he's caught in Varennes and dragged back in shame. Paris jeers. The monarchy teeters. In 1792, France is declared a republic. Louis is stripped of his title. You witness the trial, or at least the parts relayed by furious criers. Citizen Capet, they call him now. You see him go to the guillotine in January 1793. It's cold, he says a prayer. The blade falls. A few months later, Marie Antoinette follows. Her carriage bumps down Rue Saint-Honoré. People throw mud. She keeps her chin high. That moment sticks with you, her pale neck against the gray sky. Terror rolls in like fog. Executions become daily events. Robespierre rises and purges everyone who dares to blink at the wrong time. You lose friends. You hide your opinions. Paris is electric with fear. Even speaking can be fatal. And then, in July 1794, Robespierre himself is executed. The guillotine, it turns out, eats its own. You exhale. Paris exhales. The terror ends. But the revolution? That storm still circles. The streets you walk are blood-washed, but ideas have taken root. Liberty, equality, fraternity. They echo through the alleyways like wind through broken shutters. You look around. The old city is gone. What comes next? You don't know. But the drums are getting louder again. You wake up in a city still raw with aftershocks. The revolution may have guillotined its way through the monarchy, but Paris isn't healed. It's dazed, exhausted, and eyeing its next savior with the weariness of someone who's seen too many heads roll. In the post-terror calm, if you can call it that, the government lurches into the form of the Directory. 5 directors now rule France, but you can smell the instability. Corruption blooms in the gaps. The rich are back in wigs, the poor still claw for bread, and Paris is split like a broken pane of glass, beautiful, sharp, and dangerous to handle. You slip through the crowded streets, now cleared of royal statues and renamed with revolutionary zeal. Place Louis XV? Gone. It's now Place de la Révolution. Even the calendar gets remade. Suddenly it's year 2, and your birthday falls on the 4th of Thermidor. You start to miss Mondays. Enter the Corsican. Napoleon Bonaparte, barely 5-foot-something in boots, rises like a thundercloud. You hear his name whispered in every café, every corridor of the Palais Royal. The general who saved the Republic from royalist insurrection, they say. The one who might bring order. Spoiler alert, he will, but not how you expect. In 1799, he stages a coup. The Directory is swept aside like dust from a table. You feel a chill as you watch the streets quiet, not out of fear, but from the eerie calm that follows a takeover so smooth it barely registers as a revolution. And now Paris belongs to Napoleon. He declares himself first consul. Then, in a move so bold it's almost comedic, crowns himself emperor in Notre Dame in 1804. Yes, Pope Pius VII is there, but Napoleon takes the crown from his hands and places it on his own head. You watch from the crowd and think, well, that's subtle. Paris becomes the imperial capital of a new French empire. Napoleon dreams not in city blocks, but in triumphal arches and straight boulevards. You see the beginnings of the Arc de Triomphe. Massive, unfinished, defiant. It's a literal monument to victories that haven't even happened yet. You walk along the Seine and see military parades, sleek cannons glinting in the sun, uniforms pressed like pastry dough. The École Militaire pumps out officers like baguettes from a boulangerie. You start learning the names of far-off battles like their metro stops, Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram. But war takes its toll. France grows, and Paris swells with the pride of conquest. Yet coffins come home too. You attend funerals for men you never met, and watch their widows receive medals and a loaf of bread. It feels like a fair trade only if you squint. Napoleon is both reformer and tyrant. He codifies law, yes, the Napoleonic Code, and rationalizes French bureaucracy in a way that still echoes through modern institutions. You go to court and marvel that laws now apply evenly, even if justice still seems like a balancing act on cobblestones. Public works blossom again. He orders bridges, markets, fountains, clean water, and builds up Paris's infrastructure with the focus of a man designing a city as legacy. Historians still argue whether he loved Paris or merely saw it as a stage. You lean toward the latter. But even the Sun King didn't shine forever. Napoleon's endless wars bleed France dry. In 1812, he makes the spectacular mistake of invading Russia. You read about it in a tattered newspaper, wondering why no one reminded him of winter. By 1814, the Allies march into Paris. Yes, into Paris. You're on the street when foreign soldiers enter the capital for the first time in centuries. Russian, Prussian, Austrian troops. You watch in numb disbelief as Paris surrenders without a fight. Napoleon abdicates. You'd think that would be the end, right? Not so fast. He escapes Elba in 1815 and marches back to Paris. The city, in one of history's more surreal plot twists, welcomes him back like a prodigal warlord. You see the crowds, hear the cheering, then watch it all unravel at Waterloo just weeks later. Napoleon is gone. For real this time. Now the monarchy returns, awkward and unsure, like someone re-entering a party they were thrown out of. Louis XVIII takes the throne. He's pudgy, stiff, and utterly out of step with post-revolutionary Paris. You spot royalists trying to act natural in salons where they once toasted Voltaire. It's like watching a mime at a rock concert. Yet Paris adapts. Always. Restoration. Paris is cautious, restrained, a little paranoid, but there's energy building under the surface. You see artists painting in cafes, students murmuring politics over absinthe, laborers growing restless. When Charles d'Orléans succeeds Louis XVIII in 1824, he tries to crank the monarchy dial back to divine right, and it goes about as well as trying to untoast a piece of bread. In 1830, the July Revolution breaks out. You hear the gunfire near the Hôtel de Ville. Barricades rise again. Seems like they're always just beneath the cobblestones. You help stack a few yourself. By the end, Charles X is booted from the throne. In his place, a constitutional monarchy forms under Louis Philippe, the citizen king. He eats with silverware, but talks like a merchant. Parisians tolerate him, for now. He builds the July column on Place de la Bastille to commemorate the 1830 revolution, right on the spot where the Bastille once stood. You run your fingers over the bronze, wondering how long it will last. During this time, a new obsession grips Paris. Progress. Science, industry, technology. You attend lectures at the Sorbonne. One is about railway engineering. Another is about chemistry, where a young man suggests gases might one day light entire cities. Everyone laughs. You don't. Paris spreads. The population swells to over 1 million. You feel it in the air. Coal smoke, sweat, bread yeast, ink. Haussmann hasn't arrived yet, so the city is still a maze of medieval streets and choking slums. But even in the cramped quarters, you hear it, the low hum of a coming transformation. And in the cafes, writers are watching. Balzac scribbles furiously about city greed and ambition. Victor Hugo paces beneath Gothic arches, imagining a hunchback ringing bells. You buy a copy of Notre Dame de Paris and suddenly look at the cathedral in a new light, no longer just stone and saints, but a character in its own right, a survivor. Paris, in this moment, is a city holding its breath. You stand on the Pont Neuf again, older now, and stare out at a city that has crowned emperors, beheaded kings, welcomed armies, and rewritten itself more times than a romantic novel. You can feel the pressure mounting again. Another shift is coming. Something always is. You step into the 1840s, and Paris is buzzing again. But this time it's industrial. There's a smokestack where there used to be a vineyard. The hiss of steam engines replaces the clip-clop of hooves in your ears. You duck around wagons loaded with coal, tip your hat to a chimney-sweeping kid already coughing like he's 60, and wonder, when did everything get so gray? This is Paris at the dawn of the machine age, and she's evolving. Factories crop up along the outskirts, workshops hum in marais, and everyone seems to be inventing something, most of it loud, greasy, or dangerous. You pass a printing press the size of a piano, churning out broadsheets at breakneck speed. Inside the pages, politics, scandal, poetry, horoscopes, everything but peace. The tension is mounting again. Louis-Philippe, the so-called citizen king, is now seen as a sellout. He talks reform, but rules with caution. He favors the bourgeoisie and ignores the working class. You notice it in the streets. More beggars, more protests, more posters calling for liberty written in angry cursive. The economy takes a nosedive in 1846, and food prices soar. Parisians aren't patient at the best of times. Now they're starving and mad. In February 1848, it finally boils over. You're there, again, when barricades go up in the Latin Quarter. Cobblestones fly like hailstones. Soldiers fire into crowds. You find yourself ducking into a butcher's shop while revolution smears through the alleys. The king abdicates, flees in disguise, leaves behind his umbrella. In the vacuum, the Second Republic is born. You wander through a Paris that suddenly has universal male suffrage. Posters go up declaring a new world, one where labor is dignified and people are equal. You almost believe it. For a moment. Then come the June days of 1848, when worker uprisings erupt again. You witness the bloodiest street fighting since the Revolution. Over 10,000 people dead, wounded, or arrested. The smell of gunpowder hangs over the Seine like perfume you can't wash off. Into the chaos steps a familiar name, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. Yes, Napoleon's nephew. He campaigns on memories, promises order, stability, a better past in the future. People, tired and traumatized, vote him president in a landslide. You catch a glimpse of him once at the Palais de l'Élysée. Rigid, bland, wearing a mustache more expressive than his face. But Louis Napoleon doesn't stay president for long. In 1851, he stages a coup. Paris wakes up to posters on walls and soldiers in the streets. You sip your morning coffee watching democracy dissolve like sugar in warm milk. A year later, he crowns himself Emperor Napoleon III. Because apparently, history is a loop. Thus begins the Second Empire. And for all his audacity, Napoleon III does something no one else dared. He rebuilds Paris. Enter Baron Georges Eugène Haussmann. You see him at work with blueprints spread across tables the size of dining halls. He cuts through the city like a surgeon. No, like a demolition crew with a taste for symmetry. Gone are the medieval alleys, replaced with wide boulevards, grand vistas, and tree-lined avenues designed for beauty and barricade prevention. You mourn the lost labyrinths of Montmartre, but can't deny the light. Sun floods the city in ways it never did before. The sewers are modernized. Goodbye to the pungent perfume of waste in the gutters. Waterworks are improved. New parks like Bois de Boulogne open up, where you nap under chestnut trees while distant orchestras play Offenbach. The Gare du Nord is built. You watch the first steam train arrive and realize Paris is no longer just a city. It's a hub, a capital of modern Europe. People come here to be seen, to invent, to dream. Fashion explodes. You see crinolines that could sweep the floor, and mustaches waxed to physics-defying perfection. Culturally, Paris is peaking. You attend salons where Manet is debated and mocked. You pass Baudelaire reciting Les Fleurs du Mal to scandalized listeners. You stumble into a theater showing the first French operettas, where people laugh like they've never lived through 6 revolutions. And yet, beneath the gloss, discontent simmers. Napoleon III may have transformed the city, but he muffles criticism and arrests dissent. Newspapers are censored, protests are suppressed. You notice people get quieter in cafes when the police walk by. The beauty of Paris begins to feel curated. Then he makes the classic blunder. War with Prussia. In 1870, the Franco-Prussian War begins, and it's a catastrophe. France is humiliated. Napoleon III is captured at the Battle of Sedan. The empire crumbles faster than a burnt croissant. Paris is left to fend for itself. The Prussians lay siege to the city. Food runs out. You eat rat stew in a restaurant that used to serve escargot. The winter of 1870 to 71 is bone white and bitter. You burn furniture to keep warm. Parisians shoot zoo animals. The elephants don't make it. And then comes the Commune. When the government tries to disarm the city in March 1871, Parisians revolt. They seize control, declare the Paris Commune, a radical socialist experiment in self-rule. You walk among dreamers who believe they've invented a fairer future. Women gain political voices. Schools are secularized. Rent is suspended. Statues of Napoleon are torn down. You almost believe it again. But like so many Parisian revolutions, it ends in fire. In May 1871, the French army crushes the Commune during what becomes known as the Bloody Week. You hear gunfire echo across Montmartre. Communards are executed by the thousands. The Tuileries Palace burns. You watch the flames from Pont Alexandre III, the sky smeared red and orange like an oil painting gone mad. When the smoke clears, Paris is physically wounded, emotionally shattered, and politically stunned. The Third Republic rises, awkward but persistent. You walk the streets trying to recognize your city. Some days you do. Some days it's all scaffolding and ghosts. But Paris? She endures, always. The smoke clears, but it doesn't feel like healing. It feels like something broken has simply been covered with lace. The Third Republic, born in blood and rubble, limps forward with the reluctant energy of someone who showed up to a party after all the wine was gone. Paris is scarred, physically, emotionally, ideologically, but she keeps going. That's her thing. You drift through the 1870s and 1880s as the city rebuilds with stubborn grace. The Opera Garnier opens in 1875, a gilded monument to opulence. You sneak into a rehearsal once, hiding behind velvet curtains as chandeliers sway above the orchestra. You wonder how anyone can sing so beautifully in a city still in mourning. But Paris needs the performance. It's survival by spectacle now. The Belle Époque begins, not with a bang, but with a sigh. A golden age of art, invention, and a stubborn belief in progress. You walk the boulevards Haussmann carved out, lined now with electric street lamps. You see Parisians adjusting to this new light with suspicion and squinting. What kind of sorcery lets a street glow after dark? But they adjust. They always do. In Montmartre, something strange and wonderful is happening. Artists, wild ones, flock here like pigeons to breadcrumbs. You meet Toulouse-Lautrec sketching dancers with legs for days at the Moulin Rouge. You spot a young Picasso painting in a freezing garret, muttering about shapes and sadness. You step into cafes where absinthe and arguments flow like water. Everyone is poor. Everyone is brilliant. You eavesdrop on Proust in a salon, whispering about memory and madeleines like it's some kind of spell. You hear whispers of a new kind of music, jazz, just starting to slink its way into Parisian nightlife. The city's heartbeat is syncopated now, restless and brilliant. And the World's Fair. Ah, the 1889 Exposition Universelle. You're there, standing in the Champ de Mars, watching a scandal of iron rise toward the sky. Parisians hate it, call it a disgrace, an eyesore. You, meanwhile, crane your neck and think, this is the future. The Eiffel Tower opens to boos and gasps. It's tall, it's industrial, and it makes no sense in a city built on curves and Baroque flourishes. Historians still argue whether Gustave Eiffel's tower saved Paris from stagnation or simply shocked it awake. Either way, it becomes the new symbol, an iron exclamation point at the end of a century. And then, as if to remind everyone not to get too cozy, politics lurch back into the foreground. The Dreyfus affair erupts in the 1890s, a scandal involving a Jewish army officer falsely accused of treason. You see Paris divide like a cracked plate. Anti-Semitic mobs scream in the streets, intellectuals take sides. Zola writes, "J'accuse," and you feel the tremor ripple through the left bank like a thunderclap. You sit in cafes overhearing arguments that sound modern. Truth, justice, nationalism, hate. Some things never change. Some things just wear new hats. As the 20th century looms, you feel an energy. Tight, electric, too bright to last. The metro opens in 1900, and for the first time, Paris hums underground. You ride it once and feel like you're tunneling into another world. The Art Nouveau stations curve like lilies and smell faintly of oil, perfume, and damp coats. Technology is everywhere. You attend a Lumiere screening, moving pictures, and watch an entire audience scream at a train arriving on screen. You think about how easily humans are shocked, then realize you're one of them. Then, the unthinkable. War. 1914 arrives not like a bang, but a chill. You wake one day to posters calling men to arms. The streets are suddenly filled with uniforms, the cafes with silence. You help wrap bandages. You see boys marching toward the front with flowers pinned to their jackets, not knowing they're walking into mud and gas and chaos. Paris becomes a wartime city. The lights dim. Food is rationed. Zeppelins buzz overhead. You hear a bomb fall once. Distant, dull, but real. Refugees trickle in. Wounded soldiers flood the hospitals. The Belle Époque vanishes like smoke. Still, Paris resists. Cafes stay open. Poets keep writing. The Eiffel Tower is used as a radio antenna. In the shadow of death, art fights for space. Then, at last, 1918. Armistice. You join the throngs dancing on the Champs-Élysées, your body aching with relief. There's kissing, crying, too much wine. You watch veterans with missing limbs smile anyway, and it breaks your heart in places you didn't know existed. Peace returns, but it's brittle, like old glass. The 1920s come in like a jazz riff, loud, decadent, offbeat. The années folles, the crazy years, sweep over Paris. And honestly, you need it. After all that loss, all that trench mud and sorrow, the city needs glitter. You find yourself in Montparnasse now, among American expats and drunk poets. Hemingway knocks over your drink. Josephine Baker dances in feathers. Gertrude Stein hosts readings where no one agrees on anything. Paris is no longer just French, it's global. It's the city of everyone who needs to feel alive again. Coco Chanel invents modern fashion. You watch women shed corsets for freedom. Men wear looser suits, everyone daring to sparkle a little more. You dance until dawn. You laugh like it's a rebellion. It kind of is. But somewhere under the music, you feel a shift. You hear whispers in German. You notice political posters that feel a little too angry. You see shadows growing longer again. The 1930s are darker. The economy buckles. Extremism rises. The laughter softens, but never dies. You wonder, can Paris survive another heartbreak? You look up at the Eiffel Tower, still there, still standing, and think, probably. But it won't be easy. You're sitting in a smoky Parisian cafe in the spring of 1940, flipping through a newspaper with trembling fingers. The headlines scream what you already feel in your gut. Hitler's troops are closing in. And this time, the storm isn't going to stop at the borders. Paris, glorious and defiant, braces herself. You remember the last war? Muddy trenches, telegrams, amputations. But this time the fear is different, sharper, faster. You watch trains evacuate children from Gare de Lyon, their small faces pressed to the windows like porcelain ghosts. You feel the dread thick in the air, heavier than the city's usual perfume of croissants and cigarettes. Then it happens. June 14th, 1940. German soldiers march into Paris without a shot fired. You watch it from a window near Place de la Concorde, jaw clenched. Swastikas drape from the Eiffel Tower like unwanted garlands. It's surreal. The city of light is under occupation. Life becomes a tightrope. You learn to keep your voice low and your eyes lower. Signs switch to German overnight. Food is rationed again. Coffee is chicory. Bread is gray. Meat is a rumor. You trade cigarettes for butter. You listen to La Marseillaise in your head because it's now illegal to sing it out loud. But Paris, being Paris, finds ways to resist. The resistance forms in whispers. You hear passwords exchanged in bookstores. Watch a teenage girl pass coded messages inside baguettes. The metro becomes a river of secrets. You start to recognize who's real and who's a collaborator by the way they hold their cigarettes. One night, you help a British pilot hide in a wine cellar. You hear boots marching above you as you hold your breath in the dark. You survive, others don't. There are roundups. Jewish families vanish from your neighborhood. The Vel de Hiv raid in July 1942 haunts you. The silence that followed, louder than any scream. Historians still argue whether Paris did enough, or too little, or too late. You don't argue. You just remember. Then, after 4 brutal years, the tide turns. In August 1944, Paris erupts. The resistance rises. Barricades reappear, again. And this time, the city fights back. You're there when the Free French and American forces arrive. People pour into the streets, weeping, kissing, shouting. The bells of Notre Dame ring like they've never stopped. A wave of liberation sweeps the grime off the city. You feel light again, like Paris is exhaling for the first time in years. Post-war Paris is scarred but dazzling. The 1950s bring a strange energy. Grief mingled with jazz, hunger braided with hope. Sartre and de Beauvoir hold court at Café de Flore, chain-smoking through existentialism. You nod along even though you only half understand. That's okay. Most people don't. The city tries to find herself again. It's like watching someone recover from a bad dream. One slow step, one cigarette, one shrug at a time. The 1960s arrive with a louder beat. The baby boomers are grown now, and they have opinions. You wander into the new millennium with the quiet sense that Paris is learning how to live in a world that moves too fast for its cobblestones. She still walks with grace, but now she's got a smartphone in her bag and an espresso to go in hand. The rhythm changes, but somehow the melody is still hers. The early 2000s feel shiny and self-aware. Paris leans into her image, romantic, historic, timeless, but beneath the tourist brochures, the city is grappling with real questions. You notice the tension on the metro, especially in the outer arrondissements. These are not the postcard parts. These are where working-class families live, many of them immigrants, many from former French colonies. The idea of laïcité, France's strict secularism, buzzes louder than ever, especially in debates over Muslim identity and headscarves in schools. You feel the divide deepen in 2005 when the suburbs erupt in flames. Riots sweep through banlieues like Clichy-sous-Bois. Young people, frustrated, ignored, unheard, hurl Molotovs into the night. The rest of the city watches from behind glass. Some sympathize, some sneer. The government declares a state of emergency. Historians still argue whether these riots were about race, economics, or something deeper, something simmering under the pretty surface of République for decades. Paris tries to patch things with urban renewal projects, new transport links, more public debate. But the scars linger. You pass shuttered shops and remember the sound of broken glass. You also pass mural-covered walls where young artists reclaim space. There's a new kind of beauty blooming from the burn marks. Meanwhile, culture doesn't stop. The Louvre, like some proud old dame, goes digital. You can now tour her endless halls with an app. You're grateful. Your feet needed the break. You pass the Mona Lisa, still smirking under bulletproof glass, and wonder if she's judging you for taking selfies. You dip into the Marais again, and it's alive with movement. Once Jewish, then LGBTQ+, now a blend of boutiques, bakeries, and bold new voices. You eat falafel on Rue des Rosiers and watch fashionistas and rabbis pass each other like it's the most normal thing in the world. Because here, it is. 2007 brings a new president, Sarkozy, fiery, fast-talking, divisive. Paris rolls her eyes, then gets back to work. She's seen a few rulers in her day, and then, 2015. You hear the first shots on a cold January morning. The offices of Charlie Hebdo, a satirical newspaper, are attacked. 12 people die. You stand in the street that night with thousands of others holding pens and signs and each other. Je suis Charlie becomes a chant, a prayer, a scream. You can't quite believe you need to say it, but the year isn't done with you. November, Friday night, you're at a concert. Not the Bataclan, somewhere else, but the news spreads like fire. Gunmen, bombings, cafes, concerts. Streets you've walked 100 times are bleeding. You run. You check your phone. You hold your breath for friends who don't answer. By dawn, 130 are dead. Paris falls silent. For once, truly silent. You visit the memorials. Candles, flowers, notes in crooked handwriting. You see a woman sobbing outside a bar with shattered windows, and a man offering her hot tea. You see riot police, but you also see strangers holding hands on the metro. You see grief, but also defiance. Cafes reopen, music returns, people sit outside again, even in the cold. To live is to resist, someone writes on a chalkboard menu, and you believe it. In the years that follow, the city adapts. Security tightens, surveillance increases. But so does a fierce kind of joy. You go to more concerts, you drink more wine, you laugh more loudly, you dance like someone who knows what it means to lose. The Notre Dame fire in 2019 breaks your heart again. You're watching from the Seine, mouth open as the spire collapses into flames. It feels impossible, like watching your grandmother burn. The crowd cries, sings, prays. The whole world watches. Donations pour in, hundreds of millions in days. Paris, even broken, still has that kind of pull. Reconstruction begins before the ashes cool. Scaffolding rises, cranes hover, workers toil with reverence. It's more than a building. It's a soul. Then 2020. You already know what's coming. Pandemic. Paris empties like never before. The boulevards go silent. The metro echoes. You watch pigeons take over Place Vendôme. You walk through a city in masks, behind plexiglass, in isolation. The cafes close. That's when you know it's real. You stand on your balcony at 8 p.m., clapping for healthcare workers. You watch your neighbors do the same, some crying. You meet the woman across the street for the first time, with a wave from 50 feet away. Even distanced, the city stays connected. And then, slowly, breathlessly, life returns. The cafes open their terraces. People spill out like champagne from shaken bottles. The museums reopen. The Seine draws crowds again. You see someone play the accordion by Pont Neuf, and it's so cliché you laugh, but it also makes your chest ache with relief. Paris is still here. In recent years, the city has started preparing for the 2024 Olympics, Construction sites are everywhere. You sidestep scaffolding near the Seine and shake your head, because every few decades, Paris seems to need a new excuse to tear herself apart and rebuild better. There's tension, sure, between preservation and progress, between protest and policy. But there's also beauty in the effort. The Olympic Village rises in Saint-Denis. The Seine gets cleaned for the first time in forever. For the first time in over a century, Parisians may actually swim in it, on purpose. The future keeps arriving. E-scooters zip past you, dodging grandmothers and tourists. Solar panels appear on 19th century rooftops. Paris is aiming for a 15-minute city. Everything you need within a quarter-hour walk. You test it. It kind of works. You meet a woman who runs a rooftop garden in the 11th. She gives you tomatoes, tells you she used to be an accountant. Now she grows food for 5 restaurants. You want to write a poem about her hands. Through it all, the city pulses. You can still find Baudelaire in the shadows, Monet in the light, and revolution in the corners. You walk through Belleville and see murals that scream in color. You stroll past Sainte-Chapelle and gasp like it's your first time. You drink wine at sunset on the Canal Saint-Martin and forget what century you're in. Paris isn't perfect, she never was, but she's still Paris. You wake to the buzz of traffic and the faint chime of a bell from some unseen chapel, tucked between buildings like a secret. Paris, as always, is already moving. Bakers rolling dough, artists squinting at their canvases, delivery drivers dodging pedestrians in a swirl of wheels and impatience. It's the 2020s now, and Paris has decided to become something new again, though she'd never admit it out loud. The city's mayor, Anne Hidalgo, announces a green revolution. You're not sure what that means at first, until you realize that your favorite shortcut is now a bike lane. Cars vanish from sections of the right bank. Trees appear in places that were once traffic circles. You start to hear more birds and fewer horns. And slowly, it grows on you. Parisians, famously suspicious of change, adapt with reluctant flair. Electric buses, vertical gardens, rooftop beehives. Somehow it all feels natural, like the city was always meant to sprout this way. You even see sheep, actual sheep, grazing in parks as part of an eco-grazing project. A little weird? Sure, but also kind of delightful. The idea of the 15-minute city becomes more than an urban planning buzzword. You realize you haven't needed to take the metro in a week. Your baker, pharmacist, tailor, and favorite crepe stand are all within a few leafy blocks. It's like living in a very stylish village, with the Louvre down the street. Still, beneath the cobblestone calm, tensions rumble. You walk past Place de la République during another protest. Gilets jaunes, climate activists, pension reform opponents. You've lost count of what the strike is about this time. But the banners are loud, the crowd louder. Tear gas curls above cafes where people sip noisily and pretend not to notice. It's very Paris. Historians still argue whether this stubborn culture of protest weakens the Republic or saves it. You think maybe it's both. You remember the barricades, the pamphlets, the whispered rebellions. This is just a newer version, with hashtags. You pause by a statue defaced with neon spray paint. It reads, "Liberté is not just a slogan." You snap a photo, half joking that it'll end up in a museum someday. Then you realize it probably will. In Montmartre, artists still offer sketches on sidewalks, but now they take payment by QR code. Your crepe guy live streams his Nutella flips on TikTok. You smile when a street musician plugs in a Bluetooth amp before launching into a jazz remix of Daft Punk. Paris, centuries old, has entered the algorithm. The city becomes a blend of the sacred and the simulated. At Sainte-Chapelle, light still spills like syrup through stained glass, but next door, someone's using VR goggles to explore medieval Paris in 3D. You try it. You find it dizzying and strangely moving. You realize that no matter how modern the tech, the longing to understand the past never fades. You hear arguments now about how to decolonize the museums. Should the Benin bronzes be returned? What about the Egyptian mummies? You overhear debates in cafes, at university roundtables, on late-night radio. It's uncomfortable, necessary, and overdue. Paris is being forced to face its empire, not in a textbook, but in the halls of its most treasured institutions. You walk through the Musée du Quai Branly with new eyes, noting the plaques that now mention colonial looting. Some people scoff, others nod solemnly. History is not changing. It's being acknowledged. That's harder. One afternoon, you visit a temporary exhibit at the Palais de Tokyo. It's called France in Repair. It features broken chairs, stitched flags, and recorded immigrant testimonies whispering from speakers in dark corners. It's not beautiful, but it's unforgettable. Outside, school children on field trips laugh and spill soda on the pavement. Life, as always, keeps moving. You wander through Les Halles, once a chaotic market, then an architectural eyesore, now a strange blend of ultra-modern shopping center and underground transit hub. You watch a breakdancer perform in front of a Sephora. People throw coins. A guy in a beret watches approvingly, like he's seen it all before. Maybe he has. In the Latin Quarter, students still debate philosophy and politics with ridiculous intensity, but now they also worry about climate anxiety and AI ethics. You sit in the back of a smoky cafe. Yes, smoking is still a thing. And listen to someone declare that Baudrillard predicted the rise of the metaverse. You're not sure if they're right, but they sound convincing enough. Meanwhile, the Seine has become a runway. By 2024, for the Olympic opening ceremony, boats float athletes down the river instead of marching them into a stadium. It's bold, beautiful, borderline bonkers, and entirely Paris. You remember watching it on a giant screen with strangers, cheering as fireworks exploded above Pont Alexandre III, and thinking, only here. There are new tensions, too. Fears about gentrification, about the cost of living pushing true Parisians out to the edges. You meet a teacher who commutes 2 hours from the suburbs because rent has swallowed the inner city. You meet an architect trying to build micro-housing that's both humane and cheap. You remember Baron Haussmann, how he once cleared entire neighborhoods in the name of order and elegance. And now, in a twist no one saw coming, Parisians want to undo some of that perfection, make it messier again, more real. You stumble into La Villette and find a pop-up cinema playing 1950s black and white films under the stars. You sit with strangers on mismatched chairs. Someone passes a bottle of wine. The Eiffel Tower glows faintly in the distance. You're watching history through history. It's oddly comforting. And then, one evening, you walk along the river, tracing your steps from Notre Dame to the Musée d'Orsay. You pass lovers tangled in conversation, joggers with earbuds, tourists lost in the magic of their first visit. You hear a violin, then a saxophone. You smell crepes, river algae, and something faintly metallic. Maybe time itself. And you realize, this isn't a city you visit. It's a city you return to, even if you've never left. You walk through twilight with the hush of centuries around you. Paris in the evening has always been a kind of spell, and tonight it casts itself slowly, glinting off rain-washed pavement, whispering through wind-worn rooftops, glowing gold where street lamps lean over canal edges like thoughtful giants. You're not a tourist anymore. You're something else. A familiar shadow in a long, looping story. The city has learned how to survive. You've seen it rebuild from revolution, occupation, fire, even global lockdown. But survival, in Paris, has never just meant staying alive. It's meant staying beautiful and provocative and full of difficult ideas. It's meant finding some way to keep the espresso hot, the books rebellious, the balconies blooming. The 2000s roll on with quiet urgency. You feel it in the air, the heat rising a little sooner, lingering a little longer. Summers now come with water bans and warnings. The Seine glitters, but you know it's not just reflecting stars. It's reflecting fear. Climate change has a seat at every cafe table now. The chestnut trees bloom earlier. The pigeons seem angrier. Even the gargoyles look like they've been sweating. But Parisians adapt with flair. Green rooftops sprawl like moss across the 6th arrondissement. Electric bikes now outnumber scooters. You watch your neighbor install solar panels on a 19th century mansion and mutter, "Merde, I guess that's chic now." On Sundays, entire sections of the city go car-free. You walk through Rue de Rivoli like it's a promenade instead of a pressure cooker. Honestly, it's kind of glorious. You see schools adding permaculture gardens to their courtyards, kids planting herbs beside climbing frames, teachers explaining the carbon cycle between recesses. One child tells you, very seriously, that bees are more important than people. You nod. He's not wrong. Art follows suit. You visit an exhibit made entirely from upcycled trash, hanging sculptures, video installations, recycled fashion. One piece is just a cracked metro ticket machine filled with moss and tiny blinking lights. You don't know what it means, but it makes you feel something.